Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 5 of our course. My name is Hubert. I am Director and Senior Research Scientist of the African Center for Science and International Security. It is a great pleasure to moderate today's session with our excellent speakers, and we welcome you to this session. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's session. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your question into the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your question at any time during the presentation. We will collect the questions and they will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of each presentation. If we have time at the end of the session, we will take more questions. Otherwise, we could continue the discussion during the virtual lounge. Just to give you a little bit of background on the theme that we're having today. The theme for today's session is WMD non-proliferation security mechanisms and tools. The theme is topical for several reasons. The 2001 deadly terrorist attack on the US soil, the anthrax exposure a few days later, and the recent chemical assassination and attempts, including the 2017 VX used to kill Kim Jong-nam in Malaysia and the 2017 Novichok poisoning in the UK, have heightened the long-standing concerns about the proliferation and security of weapons of mass destruction. For nearly 2 decades, the United States, its allies, and the international community have initiated several mechanisms and tools to prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction and to prevent them from falling into the hands of bad actors. Today's tumultuous global security environment presents unique challenges and opportunities at very particular and historically significant key border and regional geostrategic nexus locations around the world, including in Africa. To that end, there's a renewed need to maintain strong international control over such weapons and related technologies, and the need to reevaluate the effectiveness of these mechanisms and tools and adapt them to emerging threats. Against this broad background, we have 3 great friends and colleagues, experts and practitioners, to share their unique and profound insight into 3 selected mechanisms and tools. First, Dr. Richard Cupitt will discuss United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540 and export control. Next, Ambassador Laura Holgate will take up the nuclear security architecture. And finally, Ms. Samantha Neakrase will review the Anti-Nuclear Security Index with a focus on Africa. The bios of the speakers can be found in the shared drive. I won't take any more time. I will invite Dr. Richard Cupitt, Senior Fellow and Director of the Partnership in Proliferation Prevention Program at Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. He has decades of experience in WMD non-proliferation export control and foreign policy. I will highlight just a fraction of his accomplishment in the WMD field in the interest of time. Before joining Stimson Center, Cupitt served as Special Coordinator for UN Security Council's Resolution 1540 in the Office of Counter-Proliferation Initiatives at the US State Department, where he led US government efforts that furthered the implementation of more than 200 legally binding obligations and recommendations of the resolution. He has held academic positions at Emory University and the University of North Texas. He has published 4 books, over 20 peer-reviewed articles on non-proliferation export control, and dozens of other security or trade-related publications. He is a member of the U.S. National Academies of Sciences Committee on Advanced Reactors. He holds a PhD in political science. So I don't think we could have a better qualified speaker to address this topic, UN Security Council 1540 and export control. So let's get right into this with our first speaker. Dr. Cupitt, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hubert. It's a great pleasure to be here on this webinar, and thank you very much for the kind words. So why don't I get right into it, share my screen. I'll try to make sure I stay within the limits. And let's see.
Good.
Is it sharing?
Yes, we got it.
It should be. slideshow. So hopefully we have that. Just to give you a little brief on the Stimson Center. The Henry L. Stimson Center promotes international security, shared prosperity, and justice. And we try to do it through applied research and creating tools and doing all sorts of things that are practical. I will say, I've got to brag a little bit. We were ranked number 10 in the United States among think tanks yesterday. So that was pretty good for us. And I'm in, I think, heady company here though with Hubert's AFRICSIS and the CNS and also NTI. So we feel pretty privileged to be here. The program that I run is Partnerships in Proliferation Prevention. Our sort of mission statement is keeping the worst weapons from the worst hands, if we can, or help those who are doing that. And we have a number of tools and projects underway that you can see here. What I wanted to do a little bit was to just say, how did I end up getting interested in 1540 and export controls particularly? You can see more. We do little personal stories of how we get involved in the field. I've got a link to mine, but also to the research associate for this program is Mary Vaselios. And you can see a little bit about how we ended up where we ended up. But I wanted to start on the export control side. Is I really got interested in export controls in the early 70s. And it was about efforts by the Soviet Union to acquire what at the time was perhaps the most sophisticated computer that could deal with big problems, small problems, commercial problems, science problems, but also military issues. And this was the IBM 360. And so I got in kind of thinking about, well, how do we manage technologies like this that are really important for commercial and scientific purposes, but also have military applications? And I also wanted to, since this is a STEM-oriented webinar, I want to say, which STEM fields are involved in export controls? You're probably in one of them because it touches on so many parts of the science, technology, engineering fields that it's just really it covers everything in essence. I'm sure there's something that may not fall in here, but I sometimes say export controls affect pretty much everything from family planning to developments in in sensors and lasers to space missions. So it's pretty comprehensive. So there's a lot of opportunity actually for people interested in these fields to learn and to contribute. And under 1540, it covers even more than just export controls. So there's a lot of link between what we're doing in 1540 and the non-proliferation world and all of the STEM fields. So very briefly, UN Security Council Resolution 1540 came about in 2004. It was a result of an initiative by the US government, but it was, and it really was, however, co-developed with the United Kingdom and Russia in response to the attacks on September 11th in 2001, where we really saw that terrorists, non-state actors were willing to commit mass casualties, which was a change in the way of thinking we had. But it also was, there were a lot of revelations in 2003, 2004 regarding the work of A.Q. Khan and his network that started to contributed to proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in several countries where they were trying to sell mainly nuclear, but also it had some connections to the missile field. So the resolution, one, it identifies proliferation as a threat to international peace and security. It's the first time that that was done by the UN Security Council. It's sort of United Nations code for saying the Security Council is going to get involved and can start making decisions that are binding on all. It identifies illicit trafficking as a kind of new dimension of proliferation, as I said, responding to things like the AQCon network. It requires controls over the proliferation of WMD and missiles and related material as means of delivery and related materials. Related materials are usually those things that have these kind of dual use capabilities. They're both, they have military applications, but in most cases, primarily commercial or scientific applications. And the new focus was on proliferation to or by non-state actors that was kind of shifted the paradigm and how we think about WMD programs, not just states, but also the role of non-state actors. It has, I think, a lot of value added. It applies to all states. It's certainly all UN member states. It applies to all of the WMD domains, nuclear, chemical, biological, means of delivery. I will note, I think there's a strong argument that it covers radiological as well. It fills these gaps in the existing treaty regimes, as well as addressing some emerging risks. For example, the first time we really see a discussion of counterproliferation financing is during the development of the resolution. It also addresses unmanned air systems. It can address brokering, a wide range of new or things that we saw as emerging risks. So it kind of fills gaps. It's kind of like a mortar that holds the wall that is non-proliferation together. It really is divided into prohibitions, managed activities, and then recommended activities. The prohibitions are pretty straightforward. States aren't supposed to help non-state actors get weapons or get WMD. Secondly, states, which was a real change in the way we approach things, the resolution says that states have to adopt and enforce legal measures to prohibit non-state actors from doing all these kinds of things, like developing or acquiring, manufacturing a weapon of mass destruction. And then finally, in recognizing that it's just the resolution is trying to fill gaps. It's not trying to knock down the existing non-proliferation regime. In fact, it's trying to complement it and work closely with it. So one other prohibition is states are not supposed to use the resolution to change their obligation or rights under various non-proliferation treaties or in relationship with, like, the IAEA or the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. So, when you move past controls, and sometimes I hear this, someone says, well, why don't we just prohibit trade in dual use items? That would probably undermine all of world commerce and all of world science. So the challenge is, what we want to do is not impede. In fact, we want to promote legitimate commercial and scientific applications and exchanges that relate to these dual use materials. You want to carve out those that are proliferation oriented and are meant to are illicit activities. So that's the really challenging part for most, I would say for almost all states, is figuring out where that line lies. Where do you try to I would say surgically disconnect that bit of illicit activity from the larger scale of licit activity? So what you have to do, all states under the resolution have to take measures to prevent proliferation, and these are account for production, use, storage, and transport, physical protection, border controls, and if you wish, I'll happy to speak more on controls on exports, re-exports, transit, and transshipment. For me, I had spent a lot of my life working on export controls, so that this was, in some ways, a culmination of seeing the work of a lot of people over a period of decades to get this, to get controls on exports to be an obligation of all states in order to address the issue of proliferation. So it was quite a time for me to see this happen, but more came of that. In addition, the resolution also identifies a number of areas where that are really more recommendations than requirements. One is reporting, and as a result, as we'll see, the committee actually has probably as much information on the actual non-proliferation policy states, or at least the legal measures that they have in place. It's a great repository for that. Control lists, that is what, especially dual use items, do you want to control or manage? It has states are in a position to do so, are supposed to provide assistance. States are supposed to promote and implement multilateral non-proliferation treaties. And we're supposed to approach this through dialogue and cooperation. All of these had various, or at least reveal various elements of negotiations. I'd say the last part, for example, on promotion of dialogue and cooperation, there was an early interest in including another another initiative, the Proliferation Security Initiative, in the resolution. That didn't work, but as a result, we were able to get people to accept the principle that this would all be done as best we could in a cooperative basis. So Hubert mentioned that the resolution, unlike a lot of resolutions, has more than 200 specific obligations and requirements. That's and I will say it's not like some treaties or international instruments where you're just telling people to continue doing what they're doing or continue not doing what they're not doing. You're actually, in many cases, requiring states to do things they've never done before. And so it was really hard. And an important part of that, to make sure that states live up to these obligations, is just monitoring. What are they doing? And that's the resolution created a committee. It's colloquially known as the 1540 committee. That's not its official title. And you can see its website there. And the 1540 committee had the responsibility for monitoring the status of implementation of the resolution. Its mandate has been extended several times. Its current mandate will run out in April of this year, but many people anticipate that it will be extended again. It has support by experts. I was fortunate to be one for 8 years. And then now it actually has an official group of experts. The UN Office of Disarmament Affairs also provides support. I will say it has a relatively small budget. You're talking usually $3 to $4 million a year, which there are many low budget films that go directly to we used to say video that have higher budgets. So it's a lot of work has to be done and a very small amount of money. It's data collection. It depends upon reports from states, but not just on reports from states to the committee. It can look to, the committee can use data that a state provides, let's say, on its ministry websites about itself, or in a look through the legal gazettes of the laws and regulations that are official by the state. So we can use all that kind of thing, to all those kinds of data sources to collect data. It organizes them in what we call a matrix. The matrix was just recently revised, the first time in about 5 years, December 2020. It also, the committee leads and conducts comprehensive reviews of the resolution, and much like you see comprehensive reviews or review conferences for other international instruments. There was one in 2009 was the first, 2016 was the second, and 2021 Well, there was supposed to be one in 2020, going into 2021, but the pandemic has caused a delay, and it hasn't officially, most of the activities have not really started for the next comprehensive review. But the reason I mentioned that, the comprehensive review, this is an opportunity for all states, all UN member states, and civil society organizations to contribute and make some, to help guide the committee as it moves ahead in the years in the future. Just a quick practical exercise. If you wish to do this, you can find your country's national report at that website. I'd encourage you to take a look. It usually says, this is what my country has done in the world of non-proliferation. You can look at the national matrix. As I said, they're new. At that website, you can find many states have points of contact, national points of contact. You can find out who they are. And the committee also collects what I would say lessons learned as much as effective practices, but shared experiences. And there's probably some in there, and it's not there, that's being expanded, but there's probably some in there that might be relevant to your work, such as laboratory safety, laboratory security, those kinds of things. So I encourage you to take a look at these resources. Some of the big challenges remain, though, is that we don't have implementation has made progress, but it's pretty slow, and there's still a long way to go. Enforcement is one of the areas where things lag probably more than adoption of laws. There are some new threats. That's something else the committee has to deal with. There are emerging new technological risks. That's another thing. It might be something of, for many of you, you're working in some of these fields. And also the assistance process is much more like a maze than a surefire way to get partners offering assistance to those who need it. One of the things that we do at the Stimson Center is we have a tool to help countries move through that assistance maze. It also is helpful for states who are offering assistance to see what everybody else is doing, what's happened in that country in the past, what that partner has done in the past, much like for those seeking assistance, they can see who's offering what where. It's the 1540 committee itself has a very limited mandate, and as I said, very limited resources to be able to do capacity building assistance itself. It can help in terms of writing reports and writing assistance requests and a few other things like that, but it's pretty limited. Yet this is seen as essential to fulfill the objectives of the resolution and in the future. So anyway, if you're interested and you want to see, we currently have about 1,500 programs and projects assistance listed there. I would say many of them are old and completed, but we also have about I think 300 to 400 that are underway right now. Thanks, and let me turn it back to the organizers.
Good. Thank you so much, Dr. Cupitt. So we would like to move to the Q&A session. I think we have a few minutes. Let's open the floor if there are questions so far. If you can submit a question, please feel free to use the raise hand tool. We will call on you, and then you can post your question directly. So the floor is open. I don't see a hand raised. I don't see a question. So Dr. Cupitt, so let me go with the first one. Just for the interest of the participant, especially from Africa, can you give a practical situation how export control can actually inhibit development in an African country? For example, importing a technology that is sensitive, but that has a significant application either in agriculture or in industry.
Well, I would say actually export controls, we think of them as promoting and not inhibiting technological exchange. And certainly, I think, where we would be concerned, one of the things you have to address under the resolution is end user controls. So the only concern would it be going to an end user where we have some proliferation risk or risk of diversion. So that's there, and clearly there are some threats, some groups, terrorist groups in particular, in some country, working in some countries in Africa, that you wouldn't want to see them acquiring let's say chemicals of proliferation concern, so they could construct a chemical weapon. These aren't designed, in fact, to limit legitimate trade. They're in fact should promote legitimate trade, because where companies are, if they're more comfortable that their products are not going to then be used by a non-state actor, they're going to be more likely to export to that particular country, for example. So not only knowing who the end users are, that's an important part of it, but by and large, it doesn't have a major impact at all on legitimate commerce. There are a couple of countries through the years who have suggested that the controls have an impact on limit development. Wherever we've been able to find data on that actually turns out not to be true. Sanctions are different from managing this. That's something else. So for those countries that may be affected by sanctions regimes, let's say the North Korea, for example, that's a different matter. These export controls aren't sanctions. They're designed to like I said, actually to make sure that we can promote legitimate commerce and scientific activity. So I think there's not that much to worry about. If what you're doing is legitimate, you shouldn't see it limit the. There are much other. I must admit, there are many greater barriers to exporting some of these technologies and items than export controls. Financing, of intellectual property rights. There's a lot of other reasons that would have might have a negative impact compared to export controls.
Thank you so much. We have 1 minute, and I see, Rose, you have a question. Can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Well, Rose, I see her. Oh, hello. Please, Rose, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation. During the presentation, I was thinking that most countries might have spent sources. I do not know if your center have plans for these spent sources for their storage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We indeed address some of these issues, but we're more, we're developing databases on securing radioactive materials. So there is that. There is another program at the Stimson Center, 2 other programs that might be relevant. One is our nuclear security program, and one is our nuclear safeguards program. They do address more, this is sort of that other end of the fuel cycle, what to do with, or the other end of, in this case, radioactive sources, what to do with them once they're spent. And but that's mainly in terms of creating tools to help people identify things. This may go to the next question that I can see in the Q&A session, and that's what kind of assistance. And I think that may be good for, if you take a look at the Assistance Support Initiative website, and you look in that, start to use that tool, and that tool might be, for example, you might look up radioactive. You will find some programs and projects there that address the issue of spent source materials. So that's an example of a way you could use the tool to find. The Stimson Center itself won't be doing that, but you'll be able to find programs that do offer assistance in those kinds of areas. So to answer the question more generally about what kind of assistance can be provided to all states, that's one of the things that we're trying to understand through our Assistance Support Initiative tool is what programs are out there. They cover a wide range of activities. They cover things from legislative assistance to border controls to technical assistance, capacity building, laboratory security is clearly lots of projects there. Some of the projects are global in scope. That is, they are available to all countries. Many of them have a regional approach. So, for example, the global partnership and all its partners, I think this year have a large focus on Africa. So you'll see some of the projects that are promoted through the global partnership will focus on providing or offering assistance and developing assistance partnerships with states and with a large number of states in Africa.
Okay.
I can try to answer the Malaysia one. That's the strategic trade controls. Their law has been developed over many years with cooperation from lots of us, both in and out of government and US and Europe and elsewhere, Japan, and has been worked with them for quite a while. And they developed a strategic trade control law a number of years ago now, and have been working hard to develop, focus on enforcement. However, one of the issues you're going to face is that dealing with small quantities, and that was certainly one of the things that involved in the attack in the airport. It's pretty hard to work on the enforcement side of some of these laws. Detection in particular can be a great difficulty. So that's one of the issues we all face. As I said, the enforcement part of a lot of the work has lags the development of laws and regulations. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Okay. All right. I see we have many interesting questions, but I suggest we move on to the next speaker, and we're going to come back to them at the end if time permits. Otherwise, the speaker could follow up with written responses offline. Let's move to the second speaker. Thank you so much, Dr. Cupitt. The second speaker is Ambassador Laura Holgate, Vice President, Material Risk Management, Nuclear Threat Initiative, Washington, D.C., where she is responsible for designing and executing nuclear terrorism prevention projects, such as promoting cooperation between the United States and key partners in nuclear and radiological security, and strengthening the global nuclear security architecture. She has decades of experience in a broad array of WMD issues, including disarmament, verification, non-proliferation, and security. In the interest of time, I will highlight a major accomplishment. Previously, she served as U.S. representative to the Vienna office of the United Nations and International Atomic Energy Agency, where she advanced multilateralism in risk reduction, strengthened nuclear security, enhanced verification of the Iran deal, and promoted gender balance in staff and programming. Besides, she served as assistant to the president and senior director of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Terrorism, and Threat Reduction in the U.S. National Security Council. She was also U.S. Shepherd to the Nuclear Security Summit and co-led the effort to advance the present global health security agenda. Additionally, she directed the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Fissile Material Disposition and was the Special Coordinator for Cooperative Threat Reduction at the Department for Defense, where she provided policy oversight of the non-legal cooperative threat reduction program. Holgate holds a Master's of Science in Political Science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and spent 2 years on the research staff at Harvard University's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Kennedy School of Government. So I think we couldn't have any better qualified person to speak on this topic, nuclear security architecture. So let's get right into it with our second speaker. And Holgate, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hubert, and to AFRICSIS and the CNS team for conceiving this, this course and for inviting me to be part of it. As you can see from the resume that Hubert just went through, I have a policy background, but I have been working with and alongside science and technology for decades, and have worked very closely with those in the STEM community. And I can attest to how important the activities and educational backgrounds that you're pursuing are to meeting our global threats in weapons of mass destruction. So I just want to applaud you for thinking about how to bring those STEM skills into the WMD mission. What I'm going to focus on today is the global nuclear security architecture. And I just want to be clear about what nuclear security means in this context. It's really focused on the prevention of access to materials that could be used to make either a nuclear weapon, fissile materials, plutonium, highly enriched uranium, other types of materials sometimes. And it includes, for purposes of this discussion, the lesser, I won't say the lesser included case, but it also includes within that concept, radiological security and the challenges associated with the especially high activity radiological sources that could fuel a dirty bomb with a very significant difference of the impact on lives in the sense that dirty bombs don't necessarily kill people, but they do make big, dangerous, scary, and expensive messes that have to be cleaned up and are quite burdensome, therefore, in that respect. So thank you, Hubert, for putting up the diagram. This is a diagram that I have been refining over the years and have used as an illustration point for how complex and multi-layered is the set of actions and institutions that make up the global nuclear security architecture. And because nuclear security requires global solutions, this network of national measures, international legal agreements, and voluntary initiatives that forms the basis of a comprehensive and effective global nuclear security architecture, it really depends on broad and in some cases universal participation. And if there weren't to be an effective architecture, then we would see that the progress that many countries have made to reduce the risks of theft and sabotage could be in jeopardy, and that countries will find it difficult to build on that progress going forward. It's only a common framework that holds all states accountable to the same standards that can give assurance that all countries are effectively fulfilling their responsibilities that are included, for example, as you just heard from Rick Cupitt, within the UN Security Council 1540, that responsibility falls on all countries to effectively secure their nuclear materials and facilities against an act of catastrophic nuclear terrorism, and thereby preserve the benefits of peaceful nuclear use. I would say that even though this is a complicated picture with lots of pieces, the architecture is not yet as complete or effective as it needs to be. And you'll hear in a minute from Samantha Neakrase about the findings of the NTI Nuclear Security Index that highlights the current patchwork of individual states' domestic regulations and policies, of the informal groups of countries working together, and more formal binding treaties and organizations that make up the architecture. And it's not, this patchwork really communicates that there's an ongoing lack of political will to effectively connect the elements and to empower multilateral structures to do the work that they need to do. We really believe that countries must do more to close gaps and to support, contribute to, and participate in efforts to bolster the global nuclear security architecture. So as we look at this network, NTI argues that there should be, a really effective network would have 4 characteristics. One, it would be comprehensive, in that all weapons usable nuclear materials and facilities would be covered in some way at some level of this system, that it would incorporate standards and best practices, that it would build confidence within states and among states on the effectiveness of their nuclear security practice. And it would minimize and it would reflect efforts to minimize and eliminate nuclear materials that could be used for weapons and similarly high activity radiological sources. And so if you think about this architecture, it's described here in 4 different levels. And let's start at the bottom and look at what role individual countries or states have in nuclear security. And there's, this is based on the reality, legal reality and institutional reality, that nuclear security is fundamentally an activity that takes place at the national level. This is because the state has the sole responsibility for the security of its own nuclear materials and nuclear facilities. At the state level, you have national laws, you have the regulators and the regulations and guidance that they promulgate about how to take those laws into practice. You have the governance systems of nuclear facility operators, which may be public or may be private, the utilities or the power plant operators or the fuel cycle facility operators that may exist. They have an important role as the implementers of that regulation. And many countries have nuclear security support centers or other institutions that train domestic and international nuclear security experts and practitioners. One area that is challenging, and that's why it's listed, it's shown in red on this slide, or pink, is that the security of military materials, this is plutonium and highly enriched uranium that are in military programs, weapons programs, that's only a national level effort, but it's also often quite isolated from international cooperative efforts and engagement. So there's more work to be done on military materials, in terms of sharing not sensitive or dangerous information, but even just basic information about, how that material is secured, to what standards, and basic quantities of material at the national level. Obviously, you wouldn't want to share that information at the site level. Also at the national level are organizations and activities related to protecting borders and countering nuclear smuggling, which are, kind of more law enforcement activities. So one of the other pieces that are illustrated by this chart is the diversity of the communities that are involved in the work represented by each of these building blocks in the wall, if you will, of the architecture. But what's also true specifically to this audience is that there are STEM experts that are operating in each of these boxes. So there are ways for STEM to participate in almost everything. And some of these boxes are very highly focused on STEM issues. So if we move to the next level from the sitting on top of that basis of what's happening at the state, there's a level of collectives. And these are often voluntary and informal groups of countries, or in some cases, groups of individuals who are seeking to enhance nuclear security around the world through cooperation, assistance, capacity building, other types of positive engagement. And some of the collectives of government include the Global Partnership Against the Spread of Weapons and Materials of Mass Destruction, also the Global Initiative to Combat Nuclear Terrorism, the Nuclear Security Contact Group, which is a group of countries that are seeking to continue to implement and advocate for the outcomes of the Nuclear Security Summit process. Also the Nuclear Suppliers Group, and some regional, bilateral and regional cooperative arrangements also fall into this area. One of the things particularly for this group is to think about professional societies as vehicles to promote nuclear security. Whether it's the local, your national or regional physics society, or other kinds of professional societies or student collectives, that's an opportunity to build skills and build networks of people who are working in the same area. Some key actors here with international character include the World Institute of Nuclear Security, which is a network of practitioners of nuclear security that gathers and promotes best practice. They hold training and certified training opportunities, and as well as workshops. And another one is the International Nuclear Materials Management, the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management, which has members from all over the world. It's the premier organization for professionals, from students to very senior people who are working in some way on the management of nuclear materials. So these are just some examples of these informal or non-universal collectives that are contributing to the nuclear security outcomes, and that kind of help build capacity and improve the capabilities that are happening at the national level, at the state level. So there's an interconnection between these two layers of effort. Now, on the next level, the treaties and international organizations, these can enhance and sometimes drive international obligations and commitments that then result in activities and behaviors at the national level. So the central element for nuclear security among the treaties and international organizations is the International Atomic Energy Agency and its various nuclear security activities. The IAEA's organizational mission has evolved to include nuclear security, and its nuclear security activities and responsibilities have expanded over time. Now, these are generally in support of national level actions, but what they do is they promulgate nuclear security guidance and recommendations, which countries can voluntarily adopt. They offer training and workshops on nuclear security topics to build global capacity. They also conduct peer reviews of countries' national security regimes. In other words, the laws, legal structures, and regulations that govern that country's national security. And also they can review nuclear security practices and provide recommendations for improvement at specific sites and locations. The IAEA also has resources to provide assistance to countries as they adopt nuclear technologies for peaceful purposes. And they provide a coordinating function for the centers of excellence and the nuclear security support centers at the national and regional level. They host major nuclear security conferences, such as the International Nuclear Security Conference, International Conference on Nuclear Security, that has a ministerial component, which raises political attention. And the IAEA also serves as a depository for the foundational Nuclear Security Treaty, which is the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, both in its original form and as it's amended. Now, as you can see here, and again, as we just heard from Rick, the United Nations also plays a role in the international architecture through UN Security Council Resolution 1540 and its obligations on states. But there's other treaties as well that are relevant to nuclear security. We mentioned the CPPNM, which is the only legally binding international agreement that requires countries to provide physical protection to nuclear materials and nuclear facilities. There's also the International Convention on the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism, which has a lot to do with criminalizing the various acts, malicious acts with nuclear or radiological materials, and provides the legal basis for cooperation for extradition and prosecution of actions that could result in nuclear terrorism. We also, as I've evolved this chart, we've added the Convention on Early Notification of a Nuclear Accident, as well as the Convention on Assistance in the case of a nuclear accident, because whether it's radiological material or fissile material, is that also will create cross-border actions that could involve radiological contamination. And so those two conventions offer an existing structure by which countries can notify and support each other in the case of these materials either being illicitly transferred or being used and contamination being spread. Another box that should be on there that I recently came to know more about are the nuclear weapons free zone treaties. And the Palindaba Treaty that creates the nuclear weapons free zone in Africa has Article 10 that states that each party undertakes to maintain the highest standards of security and effective physical protection of nuclear materials, facilities, and equipment to prevent theft or unauthorized use and handling. To that end, each party, inter alia, undertakes to apply measures of physical protection equivalent to those provided in the Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials and in recommendations and guidance developed by the IAEA for those purposes. So there's a link to the weapons-free zone treaties to the physical protection and nuclear security challenges. So that's another brick in the foundation that I will add in future iterations of this chart. Now, one of the main drivers for how these bottom three layers change is through the norms and the development of increased international focus on various aspects that may not be yet reflected in the formal and informal structures that are at the bottom of this chart. And so you see some of these have been recognized and have become incorporated into the, some of the actions and structures that you see at lower levels. For example, the minimization of highly enriched uranium, the importance of building confidence and carrying out nuclear security activities in a way that is visible to and builds confidence in both publics and international observers and the international community as a whole, in a way that does not reveal sensitive information. The peer review interest is one that is growing and has become reflected in some of these various boxes below. But there's some other ones that are still in the making and where updates may be required over time to the lower levels. This concept of demonstrable competence. Does everybody carrying out a nuclear security role have the specific certification of training and capacity that indicates that they are able to carry out the role that they are assigned. The issue of technology substitution is particularly in the context of radiological security, where the idea that where there are non-nuclear technologies or non-radiation-based technologies that can carry out a particular task, peaceful uses task that's in a way that's equivalent or better than a radiological based technology, then those should be preferred. The idea of providing regular progress reports in various environments. The 1540 process offers one mechanism, as does the International Conference on Nuclear Security, the upcoming review conference of the Convention on Physical Protection. These are several opportunities for regular progress reports, but none of them are mandated or required. And so there's a very uneven level of knowledge about how countries are implementing this architecture. Obviously, the challenge associated with separated plutonium in connection with its potential use for nuclear weapons continues to be a problem. The production of separated plutonium is increasing globally, and that's a very significant challenge. And then, of course, we're all coming to grips with how the cyber issues affect the existing nuclear security understandings, whether you're talking about the potential to hack into the operating system of a nuclear facility, or the potential to empower an insider with an external enemy. These are all topics that will take time to adjust to and build into the formal and informal structures in the bottom three levels of the chart. So I'll just say that there's one other broad point about this is that sometimes this level of collectives, the second row, can also drive the levels above it and below it, because collectives can often move more quickly than the amendment of an existing treaty or the creation of a new institution or regulation at the either international or national level. And so sometimes you can have the collectives moving out ahead of the others, and then the others can catch up or can build on the experience that the collectives have had to improve their activities. One example is the Nuclear Suppliers Group. The Nuclear Suppliers Group has a non-binding commitment from its members of countries who export nuclear technologies that security of those technologies and especially materials is a condition of supply. But the United States is the only country that actually builds it into our national understandings or our bilateral understandings with countries that are supplied, that there will be an on-site physical inspection or visit to a facility that has US origin nuclear material to confirm that it is consistent with the most updated IAEA guidance for physical protection and nuclear security. And so that's a best practice that can be promulgated across other countries, but it comes out of the Nuclear Suppliers Group in that kind of informal collective. And so they're as important as these individual building blocks are, again, to borrow or repeat Rick's metaphor, it's the mortar that holds them together, the informal connections, the formal connections, the non-government actors that can really contribute to the strength and resilience of this architecture. So I will be happy to take questions. I see there's some accumulating, but I haven't had a chance to look at them yet. Thank you for the chance to talk about this.
Good. Thank you very much, Laura. I see we have a question in the Q&A pane, and we also have a hand that somebody wants to ask a question. So let me start with Antonia Azike. Please unmute yourself, ask your question. Over to you.
Hubert, you can stop sharing, or who's ever sharing can stop sharing.
Okay. Stop sharing. Okay, good. Antonia Azike, unmute yourself, ask your question. Then, Laura, there's a question of the Q&A from Abdul Majid. Can you see that, or you want me to read it out?
Let me see.
Sorry, from Nana Abdul Malik.
No, I can't see one from Abdul.
It's Nana Abdul Malik, the last question.
Yes, I do see that. Sorry.
Okay.
So when by recruitment processes, I'm assuming you mean recruitment of insiders, and this is often referred to as the insider threat. And the key way to manage it is through security culture programs. And there are multiple sources of support for the for nuclear security culture. I mentioned earlier the World Institute for Nuclear Materials has multiple best practice guides on nuclear security culture that include things that are called either trustworthiness programs or personnel reliability programs that get specifically at this issue of whether or not the employees in a facility are at risk of being recruited by malicious actors, whether terrorists or criminals, from outside the facility to advertently or inadvertently contribute to some kind of a theft or attack on a facility. So there's a number of resources under this category of security culture, and also the idea of trustworthiness and personnel reliability. And so there's there is not a global, there's not a universal protocol, on the other hand, in regards to that, in part because these are very culturally specific. There are things that are normal and accepted in one country are considered problematic in other countries. And so it's it is reasonable that there might be differences in how one country or region approaches this, but the general principles are common and can be learned.
Okay, Laura, we have a couple of more questions. I would suggest if you can take one or two, then we can go on to the next speaker, then we can come back at the end when we have time.
Yeah, so how can we build confidence in nuclear security in member states and bring these treaties into universal implementation? That's a great question. That is my program's mission at NTI and many other organizations that are looking at that. I think the first step has to be a recognition that providing basic information about how a country approaches nuclear security is not a sensitive information. It does not contribute to the, to making it easier to attack a facility or to steal material. The vast majority of nuclear security information is not classified. And for example, countries can publish their laws and regulations that govern nuclear security for all kinds of materials. They can provide reports about from the regulator, for example, on the degree to which those are being implemented. When there is a violation or a problem, countries can be open and provide detail about how the problem happened and what they've done to repair that issue. And in fact, that's what I've learned from my consultations with people all over the world of what gives them confidence in another country's seriousness about nuclear materials is when there's a failure, that failure is discussed and recognized, and the lessons learned are made available to other practitioners. Another way to provide confidence is for countries to request and participate in peer reviews. The International Atomic Energy Agency has services for this, but a country could also ask for a bilateral peer review from another country with which they have a good relationship or a cooperative relationship. They can be done on an ad hoc basis. Those peer reviews are even more powerful if there's a report on the non-sensitive aspects of what that peer review found. And if there's a follow-up discussion of how any shortcomings or improvements were accomplished, and then a subsequent review to confirm that those updates were effective. So there's a lot of different things that can be done to strengthen confidence. And when I jump off with my session, I'll do some research and put some resources in the chat about the importance of confidence building. Joining treaties is certainly one part of that. And fortunately, the IAEA, the UN Office of Drugs and Crime, as well as many bilateral programs and as well as NGOs like mine and like Stimson, are taking a range of actions to promote universalization, to promote implementation, and to help countries prepare, for example, for the upcoming review conference of the amended Convention on Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, because that conference will offer an important global spotlight on that treaty and on the countries, the degree to which that treaty is being implemented by member states and the degree to which it's achieving universality. So there's a wide range of efforts underway on the treaty issues, and I am sure that also the team at CNS will have some more information about those kinds of programs, particularly because the Vienna Center for Nonproliferation and Disarmament is one of those organizations that is doing that work, the sister organization for CNS. So I will, with that, turn the floor back to the moderators and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Laura. I see we still have very interesting questions, but I suggest that we move on to the next speaker and to come back to them at the end of the session. Then I think I would like to move on to the third speaker, and this is Samantha Neakrase, Senior Director, Material Risk Management, Nuclear Threat Initiative, Washington, D.C., where she has led two major projects, the NTI Nuclear Security Index and Global Dialogue on Nuclear Security Priorities. Her recent focus has also included cybersecurity of nuclear weapons and related systems and nuclear facilities, US-Russia relations, and nuclear weapons policy and disarmament. Neakrase is co-author of Nuclear Weapons in the New Cyber Age and a roadmap for America's nuclear policy and posture. She's a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations. She holds a JD from the Villanova University School of Law and MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School, where she focused on foreign policy and national security. She also served as a research assistant for David Sanger on his book, Confront and Conceal, Obama's Secret Wars and Surprising Use of American Power. Before attending the Kennedy School, Neakrase practiced law at Stimson, Thatcher, and Bartlett law firm and clerk for Honorable Marion Trump Barry on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. As you can see, there is no better person to provide a rare look into the Nuclear Security Index development and how to make meaning out of the data and chart. Samantha will speak about a nuclear security index with a focus on Africa resort. So let's get right into it with our third speaker. Samantha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hubert. Thank you, and thank you to AFRICSIS and CNS for inviting me. I love to talk about the index, so I'm really excited to do so here. I know we're slightly short on time, so I may skip through some of these, but I wanted to start with something that Laura had also mentioned, which is kind of defining what this is all about. And so I like to think of this in terms of the actions and then the goals. So as Laura mentioned, nuclear security is about preventing theft of nuclear materials that could be used in a nuclear bomb, or an attack on a nuclear facility that could lead to a radiological release. Radiological security is actions to prevent theft of radioactive sources. And we see those in places like hospitals or research centers, and those could be used to build a dirty bomb. So those are the actions to prevent those thefts or acts of sabotage. But the goal of all that is, of course, to protect people and protect lives, but also the environment and the economy, and then in turn to preserve and expand access to peaceful use of nuclear technology. And that's why it's important to kind of remember that strong nuclear security benefits all countries, not just those that have those materials. Because in fact, in this case, there really aren't borders. Any material that's stolen in one country could be used in another country. And any act of nuclear or radiological terrorism anywhere could have an economic and environmental or political impact in other countries, again, not dependent on borders. Those types of actions could then damage public confidence in the peaceful use of nuclear technology, again, including for energy and medicine and agriculture and research. And when you reduce public confidence, then countries may find themselves less able to use those technologies for what is the greater good for all of us, which includes meeting sustainable development goals and combating climate change, again, nuclear medicine, all those things. So the strong security, in fact, preserves and expands access to peaceful use. And all countries do have a role to play in that, not just those with nuclear materials or facilities, because they're needed to close gaps in the laws and regulations that not only secure materials, but also criminalize and punish certain nuclear crimes. Every country or region might have a different role, but they still have a role to play. So the index, I'm just going to go very quickly into what the index is before jumping into the results. So this 2020, last year, we launched the 5th edition of this index. And what it does is it tracks progress on nuclear security, identifies where there's challenges in the global nuclear security, and importantly, promotes actions by governments to strengthen security with very specific actionable recommendations for countries to improve their own security, but also strengthen the global architecture, which Laura outlined. The index is actually 3 rankings. We look at 22 countries that have 1 kilogram or more of what we call weapons usable nuclear materials. That's the highly enriched uranium and the plutonium, and Laura mentioned those. And those 22 countries include South Africa. We also look at 47 countries that have certain types of nuclear facilities where an act of sabotage could lead to a significant radiological release. Those include nuclear power plants, research reactors. And in the case of, for Africa, this particular ranking, those 47 will include Algeria, Egypt, Morocco, and South Africa. And then this big group here, 154 countries, those are the countries that have less than 1 kilogram or no weapons usable nuclear materials. And we look at them again because all countries do have a role to play, even though it might be different if a country has no materials. In the 154 countries, there are 52 that are in Africa, including Algeria, Egypt, and Morocco that also are in that sabotage ranking. Just a quick thing, fact about how we do this. So this is supposed to be an objective assessment. So we do work with an organization called the Economist Intelligence Unit, and they're sort of renowned researchers around the world, and they gather all the data. And they look only at public information, and it's only at a national level. They're not going to facilities and gathering information about what is happening at facilities. They're looking at laws and regulations and actions that countries are taking that are public and visible. And again, this is research by the Economist Intelligence Unit. We also want this to be an international product and represent international priorities. And so we have an international panel of experts that advises us on what to include in the index. And Hubert, we were lucky to have him join our panel of experts, which represented 13 different countries. And then we also give governments a chance to look at the research before we publish it. We want to be transparent with them, but also make sure that the information is as accurate and up to date as possible. And this year, 27 of the countries that have materials or facilities did review that data. However, none of the 4 that are in Africa did so. And I already mentioned this already, but the goals are to track progress, identify challenges, and promote actions, and really drive kind of an ambitious approach for countries as they continue to improve security. And I'll skip the rest of that in the interest of time. Last year, in addition to the nuclear index, we also launched for the first time a small assessment of radioactive source security in all 176 countries. And those are actions to prevent a dirty bomb. In this case, we didn't score or rank countries like we do with the NTI index, but we just kind of did a survey of what countries are doing. And this is going to be relevant to a much greater number of countries than the parts of the nuclear index. I'll just very, very quickly, the overall findings in the nuclear index, we saw gaps both at national regulatory levels, particularly in areas like insider threat prevention that Laura mentioned, security culture, and cybersecurity. And then the international architecture that Laura spoke of also has lots of weaknesses. Countries are not fully engaged in some of those important initiatives or efforts to strengthen global security. The biggest finding, though, is that we've seen that progress has slowed, and we've been doing this index every 2 years, and this last index showed quite a big slowing of progress since the last index came out. And this tells us that there needs to be much more attention, particularly at higher levels, on nuclear security and making it a priority. And of course, improving nuclear security laws and regulations to fill those gaps. And then ensuring that all countries, again, not just those with materials, are taking actions to support global efforts, participating in those initiatives, signing the treaties, supporting the IEA and working with them in various capacities to close those gaps in that big chart that Laura showed. And in the radioactive source security assessment, we saw some similar trends. The kind of architecture, those treaties, those international initiatives are not countries are not fully engaged in those. And the regulations on radiological security are even sort of weaker, have more gaps than even in the nuclear space. And then an issue of how to replace some of those most dangerous sources that are used in, for instance, hospitals with other technology that is not dangerous in that way, that there's a limited commitment around the world to doing that. And that is one of the best ways to reduce the threat of the dirty bomb, is to simply replace those sources with something that cannot be used in a dirty bomb. So getting to Africa, just a bit of context, and many of you probably already know this, but I thought I would at least give a quick overview. South Africa is the only country in Africa with 1 kilogram or more of highly enriched uranium or separated plutonium. And there's 52 countries in Africa with less than 1 kilogram. So we look at those separately in different rankings. There are 4 countries in Africa that have the nuclear facilities that, if an act of sabotage occurred, could lead to a significant radiological consequence. And those are listed here. Algeria has research reactor, Egypt, research reactor, but potentially planning a nuclear power reactor. Morocco, research reactor, and South Africa has both a research reactor and a power plant. There's 3 countries also in Africa, very small research reactors, and we don't include them in that sabotage ranking because they're so small. We don't sort of consider them to have that the kind of consequence that could lead to significant loss of the environmental or economic consequences. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be secure, but they're treated a little bit differently. And then there are some countries that are interested potentially in the future on building reactors, and that's Kenya, Senegal, Tanzania, Tunisia, and Zambia. And then many, many more countries in Africa have radioactive sources. So there's a sort of mixed status of the different countries in terms of what they have and therefore the actions that they would be taking. So this, and some of these charts are going to be a little bit small, but you'll get these charts, and all of this is available on the website and in the report. But I wanted to use some visuals to kind of show where countries are. On this chart at the top, we have, this is only African countries. So at the top we have in the countries with materials, only South Africa is in that ranking of 22 countries, and they get a medium score. The scores are actually spread out across high and medium and low if you look at all 22, but this is where South Africa sits, kind of in the middle. And then in terms of the countries with facilities, you see South Africa again, but also Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, also in the middle. This is, if you look at other regions, this is closest to how Latin America and the Caribbean looks, with most countries in the middle. If you look at Europe, Eastern Europe, they tend to skew to the high score. And then Asia Pacific is sort of a mix as well, skewing to the high score. But you can kind of see the African countries with the material and facilities sort of right in the middle. And this is countries without materials. So again, they're assessed separately, and you can see the vast majority are in the medium category, with 3 countries scoring high, and then a bunch of countries scoring low. Again, a similar distribution when you look at Latin America and the Caribbean. Europe skews to the high score. Eastern Europe also skews high. Asia Pacific is sort of more spread out. So you can get a sense of where countries are. And this is going to be hard to see, but this shows of the countries without materials, the top 10 in Africa are Nigeria, Morocco, Ghana, Algeria. And I won't go through the whole list, but I think it's interesting to note that Nigeria, Morocco, Ghana, and Algeria all have some type of nuclear facility. Nigeria and Ghana, the much smaller, but that tells you kind of they're maybe more focused on nuclear security and therefore engaged in some of these international instruments. The 4 countries that have materials or facilities, we look at their laws and regulations to see what their requirements are for nuclear security. So just showing these 4 alone, you can see that South Africa has the best score of those 4 with a score of 40, but that's not great. And so there's lots of room for improvement. If you look at some of the key areas within laws and regulations, insider threat prevention is one area that's weak across the board. Here, all of the countries, all of those 4 countries scored a 0 on that, except for South Africa, which got 2 of the questions credit for. But this is an area that's really important because insider threats may be the hardest thing to address, but also most potential risk, I think, for theft of material or even facilitating a cyber physical attack or active sabotage. Similarly, cybersecurity, it's weak across the board for all countries, but here all except South Africa received a 0 on cybersecurity. And then under security culture, also weak across the board, but Egypt was the only one of these 4 that scored I think it scored a 1 on this question. And then Egypt, because it references security culture and regulations, the other countries don't even reference that phrase. And that, again, that's something that we found across the board in all regions, is this sort of weak acknowledgement of security culture as an important topic. International legal agreements. So Laura talked a lot about the treaties. We look at these 3 treaties here, and I didn't put all the word soup on here because it's long, but the first is the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material. The second is an amendment to that treaty that is about 15 years old, and it really expands the treaty, and that is the key treaty that we want countries to be signed up to. And then the third is the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. It looks more about the criminalization side. As you can see, this is countries in Africa. I'm including all of the countries that we mentioned, whether they have materials or not, or facilities. So that's 53. And you can see that for the original CPPNM that's on the left, which is sort of the weakest treaty, that's, there's a lot of African countries have signed on to that. But when we get to that amendment, that's very important and expands the scope, you see that number drops, and more countries have not ratified it than have ratified it, including South Africa has not ratified that. And then on the right, you see a similar trend. So this, demonstrates that there's quite a lot of room for improvement when it comes to ratifying treaties in Africa. Moving to this next set of things that we assess in the index, we call them voluntary commitments. And what they are actions to support some of those other instruments that Laura mentioned in her presentation, things like the Global Initiative to combat nuclear terrorism, certain activities that support or participate in the International Atomic Agency activities. And in this part of the index, we actually look at 9 different activities that countries can take voluntarily, but we do a maximum score of 6 because we know that not all countries perhaps can do all these things. So this chart shows, of the 53 countries in Africa, how many countries have taken a certain number of actions. So you can see one country in Africa, which is Nigeria, has taken 6 or more of the actions, those voluntary actions to support initiatives. 2 countries have taken 5, and that includes Algeria and Morocco. They have nuclear facilities. 4 have taken 4, 6 have taken 3, and then you get this big peak where you have the vast majority of the 53 African countries not really taking more than 1 or 2 of those voluntary actions. I don't have a chart on this, but if you dig into the data even more and kind of take a look at the specific actions and what has the strongest engagement, the highest engagement is participation in the International Atomic Agency's incident and trafficking database. And that's where countries report to the IAEA any sort of malicious activity, theft or loss of nuclear or radiological materials. And it's a way to track risks and threats and share information. And 34 of those 53 African countries participate in that. Also, 25 of the African countries engage in some form of bilateral or multilateral system. So that's really good because you need that engagement to strengthen security and build awareness. And then there's other actions that have less engagement. But the sort of the takeaway here is that in Africa, more is needed to engage people and get them involved and aware of these activities and participate in that global architecture. So some specifics of what countries in Africa can do: sign and ratify those key international treaties, especially that amendment to the CPPNM, which you've heard a few times. Become a member of that IAEA database. It's important to track incidents. participate in the IAEA's Nuclear Security Guidance Committee. And that's a committee that looks at, develops the guidance documents that the IAEA distributes. And it's really helpful because even if a country doesn't have nuclear material that they need to secure or regulate in that way, they have a stake in what other countries are doing. And so participating in that committee, even if a country doesn't have materials, I think is really important. Attending the IAEA's nuclear security conference that happens every 3 or 4 years, sending a minister to that conference is really important to demonstrate countries' commitment to nuclear security. And it's an opportunity to engage with peer ministers and have those bilateral conversations and really highlight the things that your country is doing and get some sort of public credit for that. And that's important as well to encourage other countries to do the same. Again, participate in things like assistance programs, the Global Initiative, which is a really good organization that works on capacity building workshops and exercises and matches assistance with countries. And then for Algeria and Egypt, Morocco and South Africa, which have materials and facilities, strengthening those regulations is really key. And I showed you those weak areas: insider threats, security culture, and cybersecurity. And then any countries that are interested in building nuclear research or energy programs in the future, and I did mention a few African countries that do have interest, putting in place a strong regulatory regime that includes an oversight body, but also laws and regulations, and an ability to train and sustain a workforce is really important before building those facilities. I'm looking at the time here. I think we're almost out of time, so I'll probably skip through these. And you can see them in the PDF that gets circulated. But on radiological security, what I'll just say is that we do look at laws and regulations, and we get a lot of that information from the Stimson Center. So thank you, Rick, for that. And here this is on the top showing the percentage of countries doing certain actions, regulatory actions on the top, and then the bottom slicing out the African countries. And what you can see from this is that a higher percentage of countries in Africa are not doing some of these, having some of these regulations in place than the rest of the world. So I will note that there's weaknesses all over the world for this topic, but there's a slightly different, a slightly more higher challenge in Africa on this topic. And same for this is looking at countries' participation in radiological security related architecture. So the IAEA Code of Conduct on the safety and security of radioactive sources is kind of the key series of documents on this, even though it's a voluntary, it's not a treaty, but it is sort of the highest status of international document on this. You'll see it's kind of across the board at the top, all countries. There's quite a few countries have not participated in these instruments, and that trend is the same in Africa. You can see below, I'm just going to give an example. If you look at let's see, B12, it's the second row, you'll see that 32% of all countries have not taken that action, and 34% in Africa. So it's a similar gap globally and in the region for some of these. And the last one is on alternative technology. And I mentioned that, swapping out the most dangerous sources to another technology that's just as effective but doesn't pose that risk. Again, this chart is hard to read here, but you'll see it in the PDF. This is a weak thing around the world. Most countries have not committed to replacing these sources with an alternative technology, and there's significant capacity challenges that have to be addressed. It's one thing to say countries should do this. It's another thing to say, recognize that there may be limited infrastructure or skilled workforce to maintain these technologies. And this is where in Africa, there's a little bit more of a challenge than in some other places. And in this assessment, we looked at capacity in two ways. One, looking at how many power outages there are at businesses in a month. That kind of tells you, you need a strong electrical grid to support these technologies. And we also look at the education level in different countries because of the need for a skilled workforce to maintain the technology. And that's where you see quite a bit of difference between Africa and the rest of the world. So 15% of countries around the world experience frequent power outages. So, not a reliable grid, but that number is 26% in Africa. And that probably is not a surprise. Similar trend with education levels. So again, this is a difficult topic all around the world. Africa has some specific challenges that need to be addressed. And this is going to require really international cooperation to support this, to recognize some of these challenges and try to find ways to address them. So again, what can Africa do? Strengthen those regulations to secure the radioactive sources and track them. Specific on security, not just on safety. Strengthen oversight and inspections. Implement the code of conduct, that foundational radiological security document. Participate in that, implement it. Ratify the legal agreements. And then I say commit to implementing alternative technology where possible, again, recognizing those capacity challenges, but then engaging in international efforts to strengthen that capacity to eventually be able to implement that technology. So there's a lot there, and there's so much more data, and I would just encourage people to go to the website at www.ntiindex.org, and you'll find lots of information. You'll find the reports to download. You'll find the big spreadsheets with all of the numbers and all of the data that you can dig into. And also you can go to specific country pages and review the information about them and the customized recommendations for each country. We have a French translation of an excerpt of the report available on the website. And I would just ask, please email me with questions. If you think of interesting ways to use the data, or you see some new patterns, we want to know. We want it to be a resource and a tool for other experts and researchers around the world. So please let us know what you see and what interesting ways you're using the data. So thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, Samantha. I think we will be going to begin answering the questions if there are any, or if we have participants that have indicated they want to ask questions. But I have a request first. We would like to take a screenshot of all the participants, so I kindly ask every person to turn on your video. Then Moderator will take those photos and let us know. Please turn on your videos. Let's take a virtual photo. Turn on your videos.
Caitlin, could you stop spotlighting Hubert, because I only see him on the screen. I don't know if it's possible.
Yes, just one.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Is that all what you could do, Caitlin?
I don't think that I'm the one who's spotlighting his video.
Oh, okay. Maybe Jean could do it, because I don't think I could do this. So sorry. If we cannot do it, that's okay. I just
stand by, Margarita. I'll see
okay.
what I can do. Yeah.
My apologies. I don't mean to be disruptive.
Yeah, I seem to have.
It's okay. Then let's continue with the
I've lost that that function.
Okay, that's okay. Well, let's continue. Sorry.
So we have about 15. We have about 5 minutes to 12:15. So I would suggest that we have all the speakers come on board. Then let's go back to the question. some of the questions that we did not answer, and if we have new questions that are coming up, especially questions that will be going to Samantha. So the floor is open. Just a reminder, please, you can type your question or you can indicate, and we'll call on you to ask your question. So do we have a new question? I think, Ambassador Laura, there seems to be a question there for you. The last question, I think you answered that one from Nana Abdul Malik. Then before there's another question, should African countries be worried or not in terms of nuclear security issues, since they still lag behind in terms of policies, materials, commitment, challenges required?
So I will say that all countries should be concerned about nuclear security because, again, all countries can be impacted by a nuclear security incident, whether that's you know, a theft or sabotage of nuclear or radiological security anywhere. And I think Africa, you know, is really beginning to rely more on different peaceful use of nuclear technology for all kinds of reasons, medicine, you know, its development. And so having kind of continued access to that and having public confidence in those technologies requires strong nuclear security. And it's easy to say, oh, well, you know, we're using that now and it doesn't seem to be a problem. Well, because, you know, a nuclear terrorism act hasn't happened, but if it does, and that could really impact everybody's ability to use nuclear technology. And Africa, I think, has a special interest in assuring future use of that technology. And yes, you know, there's a lagging behind, but there are lots of resources, IEA, the World Institute for Nuclear Security. There's many opportunities to engage. And part of why I think this conference is really great is because it's building a lot of awareness among an audience that maybe isn't you know, aware of these resources, but you can take those back and seek to get more, you know, educated and of what's out there and why this is important. So I would say, please stay worried and engaged so that you and your colleagues and your governments can take the appropriate action to support nuclear security around the world.
I have a question, and I believe it cuts across all the three speakers. I will read it. It's more like a comment, also at the same time like a question. And I read, I work for the regulatory body, and I regret to say the security culture is irretrievably broken down. No employee have access to non-employees have access to high category sources and controlled areas. I have raised this issue now and again, but no one listens. What do I do? So you want to start, Laura? Rick, you want to start?
I can try to jump in. One is, I think it goes to the points that Laura and Samantha have made about the need for awareness raising across the community. And there was another one about parliamentarians not being aware. You know, I think one of the things I would hear through my years was, we don't have any of this stuff, so why should we be worried about it? And I think as the Nuclear Threat Initiative has shown in their data, essentially every country, and I've looked, every country has radioactive sources. They may not have special nuclear materials, but they have radioactive sources. Almost every one of those countries, I would say, well, 90% of them export those sources. That's usually returning it to whoever may have produced it, for example. But it's everywhere. And what I, would hope is that we don't have to have a terrible catastrophe take place. But as long as states are vulnerable to this, and there are threat groups, there are organized, sometimes it can be even organized crime, not just terrorists, who are interested in radioactive materials, that there is this chance for a catastrophic response. So I would encourage everyone to think about how can we raise awareness. We don't want to say the sky is falling, it's all terrible. But we do want to make sure that people are aware. There are assistance programs that are designed to be promote awareness and build awareness in various communities. I think I mentioned in the question and answer, there are Parliamentarians for Global Action, Inter-Parliamentary Union, both try to work with parliamentarians, raising awareness about a range of issues, including nuclear and radiological risks. So I empathize. There are also specific programs dealing with lab security culture and security culture of facilities. So that may be another thing to do, is seek a partnership to see if that will help raise awareness. But it's a challenge. It is a challenge.
Yes, Samantha, you wanted to weigh in on that?
Yeah. This is a hard situation. There's so many layers at which strong security culture is needed for what you're describing to be avoided. And that starts with the top and strong regulations, and then coupled with strong oversight. And oversight requires also, standards, but inspections against those standards. So the first step is, do you have those national structures in place? And if not, you personally can't, but how do we make sure that countries all have those structures in place? Our index is one way to kind of assess that and put some pressure on countries. Any kind of international conference where countries are gathered together, really other countries' responsibility to really promote those important issues. And then once you go sort of down from the regulatory body to facilities, there needs to be that kind of accountability at the senior operation levels, CEO. And so that security culture flows down, and then you get to training programs and awareness programs at facilities or at the labs. But those can be, required by regulations. So there is a way for national bodies to not just kind of wait for facilities to do it themselves, but to put in place some requirements and assessments. Other things that can help, IPAS missions. The IEA offers several types of peer reviews or assessments to help countries identify areas where there may be challenges that can be addressed, and then help to address them and then do follow-up. So I would say maybe that is maybe the top thing I would suggest if you are able to, reach somebody who could somehow, facilitate an IAEA engagement, whether it's a peer review or some other engagement. That's another way to help with this. But I know that you maybe have limited ability to make those changes, but those are some areas that at least would address that problem.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we're just about 5 minutes slightly above our time. And on that note, I really want to thank you, Dr. Richard Cupitt, Ambassador Laura Holgate, Ms. Samantha Neakrase, and to thank you everyone for attending today's session.